I'm joined today by Sarah Benor, an associate professor of contemporary Jewish studies at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, and author of Becoming Frum: How Newcomers Learn the Language and Culture of Orthodox Judaism. Sarah, it's so great to talk to you. You know, we've interviewed a number of different people generally in the world of linguistics, and we've talked about the different dialects and accents that exist in the United States. But one that I've increasingly been reading about is what's sort of colloquially known as the Jewish accent. And I think that there's many people who sort of intuitively know what it is that we're talking about. But how is this defined academically? What are we talking about when we say the Jewish accent?
Well, I would say there are two different types of Jewish accents. The one that you're probably referring to is the New York Jewish accent that's influenced by immigrant Yiddish and probably spoken by the children and grandchildren of immigrants. And then there's the accent of Orthodox Jews throughout the English-speaking world, where their English is influenced by Yiddish grammatical structures and Yiddish sounds in a slightly different way than the immigrant generation and their children and grandchildren.
So I have friends who sometimes will disagree about when you're talking about the often sort of immigrant, New York associated so-called Jewish accent. There's disagreement as to whether we're talking about something distinct and unique in terms of a Jewish accent, or whether we're really talking about a particular sort of neighborhood, be it Lower East Side or Brooklyn version of just a New York accent. Is one or the other view right or wrong?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that the New York accent is sometimes seen as a Jewish accent, and that has to do with the large New York Jewish population. But I would say that there are certainly Jews who are not from New York who sound like they are from New York or who have elements of a New York accent.
And when we talk about that, is this a phenomena that was first identified sort of in the early 20th century with the wave of immigration to certain parts of New York City? Or what other sort of historical connections have been associated with this?
Yes, the historical wave of immigration to New York from Eastern Europe between 1880 and 1924 played a big role in the establishment of a distinctive Jewish sound. You might call it an ethnic way of speaking, and you can see this in other ethnic communities throughout the United States in different regions, such as the German population in Wisconsin, or the African American population in various cities, or Latino population in various cities, that if an ethnic group has a large concentration in a given area, then they will likely have distinctive features in their language.
Now, you've done some research which has revealed that even among Jews who are not from New York themselves, and even whose parents did not live or are from New York, that there's a much higher likelihood that they will exhibit some of the characteristics that are often common to this sort of Jewish accent that we're talking about. And this might include the pronunciation of Florida versus Florida and some other even phrases, online versus inline, etc. How do we explain this? How do we understand that?
Right, and I personally do that myself. My parents lived part of their childhood in New York and the New York area, and I didn't grow up in New York, but I say Florida and horrible. And I think it has to do with the New York-centered social networks that many Jews have. That if many Jews interact with other people who have spent time in New York or who grew up in New York, then these kinds of New York features will spread. And that's true in the non-Orthodox circles that I'm a part of, but it's also even more so in the Orthodox world, where there's a particular feature, I call it the non-raising of prenasal a, so that is saying words like candle and camp instead of candle and camp.
Right.
And that feature is common I think it started in New York as a response to the New York vows, and then among Orthodox Jews, and then spread all throughout the country so that people in Orthodox communities around the US have, many of them have that feature.
I've sort of anecdotally observed during my time living in New York City up until about a year ago, and also now living in Boston, both cities that have particular accents that are often portrayed in media, etc., that increasingly there seems to be a sort of class element to, particularly with younger people who are hearing more English in media and sort of non-localized English accents, that it seems as though many of these accents are becoming less common, particularly outside of lower middle class individuals. Are my anecdotal observations accurate in your mind, or maybe not?
Yes, there is certainly evidence that the New York accent is decreasing to some extent. And you're absolutely right that social class plays an important role in how local people tend to sound.
And when you sort of try to think going forward, I think that there's, we spoke, for example, to the linguist William Labov about his analysis of the different accents that exist in the U.S. What can we say more generally about? I mean, are there? It seems to me we can't necessarily say that all of these accents are going to be decreasing over time, maybe depending on how isolated certain communities are. I mean, we know that the Appalachian way of speaking maybe is going to persist more strongly because it's maybe a more isolated community than maybe your average New Yorker. I don't know. I mean, is there some trend that we can observe?
Right. Well, the New York accent has been shown to be decreasing to some extent, but other regional accents around the country are very strong. For example, in the Midwest, saying salad instead of salad is actually increasing and is widening in the areas that it's used in. And the California vowels are also becoming more distinct in certain ways. So right, I don't think it's a nationwide trend of the decrease in regional accents, but certainly the New York accent in particular has diminished to some extent.
Do you have any opinion as to whether media portrayals of accents tend to sort of reinforce them in some way, or does it make others maybe more aware of speaking differences such that they might try to avoid a localizing accent? I mean, maybe it's more of a psychology question than anything else, but do you have some sense of that?
Yeah, I think we don't have enough evidence to answer the question of the role of the media in influencing the spread or decrease in regional accents. But we do have some idea of how certain accents can become seen as a particular accent because of the media. Or, for example, in Pittsburgh, saying going downtown for downtown is has become has gained cachet, and that probably is influenced by the media and by T-shirts that say those kinds of phrases and that highlight the distinctive Pittsburgh way of speaking.
Well, it is absolutely fascinating. I'll remind you the book is Becoming Frum: How Newcomers Learn the Language and Culture of Orthodox Judaism. We've been speaking with the book's author, Sarah Benor, who's an associate professor of contemporary Jewish studies at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. Sarah, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me.